So, fast forward to May, we were going to start by trying to spray starting fluid in throttle body. So I put everything back together and I tried to start it just to see if it would, happen the same way, if I could at least crank it over. But it actually tried to start and I heard combustion, but it, sputtered and then it died, or it didn't, it just choked out. And it turns out that this vacuum hose to the fuel pressure regulator was being pinched because it was sandwiched between these two intake manifolds. So I had to take this all out again, make this hose sit freely, and then I, bolted back the intake manifold and then try to start it again. This time it actually started and it stayed on. It was like really rough. Like it sounded like it was gonna die, but it didn't. It kept on catching itself, but it was a high clattering noise, like a clack, 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 like that. And it was coming from the cylinder head. So at first I thought it was because I had drained lifters, because I heard that the clacking noise is just because of the lifters, but this was a different kind of sound. I posted a clip to the forums and they said it could be timing, and that sound is actually interference of the valves with pistons. So that was pretty scary. So I, ripped off the valve cover, and I took a look at the camshafts and the timing components that I could see from up top, just to see if anything like chunked off or whatever, but everything looked okay. So apparently one of the guys on the forum said that the M42 has a pretty good tolerance, even with interference. So we just had to readjust the timing. So I got my flywheel locking pin. I stuck it in that hole, and then set the car at top, set the crank at top dead center. I checked the split tooth on the crank pulley against the oil filter housing, which has the timing mark, and that lined up. I had to check the cam sprockets. They have little arrow marks that point up towards the case, and one of them was off by 1 or 2 teeth. So, and also there's square edges on the back of the camshafts that have to sit flat against each other. So like if you laid like a flat piece of wood or something, there would be like no gap in between. It wouldn't like raise up, it would just sit flat like that. I had to take off the cam gears, readjust it by a tooth or two, and then I had to kind of bolt everything back up, hand crank it a few revolutions, and wait for it to come back to see if it stays flush or stay leveled. It didn't happen the first couple times, so I had to, readjust it, micro adjustments, and then on a third or fourth attempt, after hand cranking it, it all kind of stayed consistent. And then I, buttoned everything up, and then I tried to start it again, and thankfully that started and it sounded normal. No more clacking and no more check engine light. So that was a relief. It had a rough idle, so I did a stomp code test anyway, even though there was no check engine light, and I got a 1215, which was the airflow mass sensor. So we thought, okay, airflow mass sensor, I didn't really mess with this, but it's, tied into the throttle position sensor and the ICV connector. So I heard ICV is a common culprit for rough idling. So I took that off, and it turns out that this vacuum hose from the bottom elbow of this intake tube was kind of just hanging out there. I don't think it was even connected. So I clamped it down, and I also cleaned the ICV and put it back together, and then started her up again. And it started normal. The idling was around 700 RPM, which was, I guess good. It didn't sound like it was dying, and it stayed on. So, I revved it a few times, even past 2500, and I didn't really hear anything problematic. So I would think that the idling could be a number of other things, such as like, fouled spark plugs, because those are probably old, or ignition wires. These are all maintenance items that I haven't addressed yet for the time that I've had it, and it's been like a couple years. So those could be things that I could replace that could help with the idle, but as of now, it is okay. It was suggested that I took a compression test to make sure that the engine is still healthy even after the interference that occurred. So I went to AutoZone, got a compression tester, rented it for 40 bucks, and I tested all four cylinders, and I got compression at 180 psi between each cylinder, and there was pretty much no variance between all four cylinders. It hit like 180 across the board, which is healthy, apparently. So I'm going to chalk it up and say that the engine rebuild is a success. So right now, what's next?